everything's your job. The most important things is talking to customers, which should never not be your job.
All right, so I want to kick things off talking about product market fit. You've said if people aren't talking about your product unprompted, you don't have it. This is true for startups and even coffee shops. You pivoted into Nira after a CEO freaked out when he realized who could access sensitive files, something that was unexpected. Can you talk through this story in as much detail as possible and how it shaped the future direction of the business?
Yeah, we had built an enterprise search tool, for lack of a better explanation, very similar to Glean, since that's pretty popular these days. It's a good explanation. So we kind of started when they did, and we had built an enterprise search product before they had a product. So we were in market and learning things. This was pre-AI. And so what we did is we built a product where it connected to a bunch of the documents that you document repositories that you basically use, and then it showed you an interface. The interface is still pretty unique, but the short of it is, in addition to letting you have a search box, we actually had a feed where it was reverse chronological order, and it told you all the things that were being modified. And then on one sidebar of it, which is the right sidebar, we actually had an entire column of faces. And these are all the people that you essentially have shared files and documents with. And you could click on any one of them. You could see all the stuff that you have shared with them. This is still not something very easily possible in most products. So we built that. We built it as a Chrome extension as well. And we took over the new tab because our thesis was, at work, you want to find stuff. That's a big use case. We're not really getting in the way because the new tab is just real estate. You usually put like a happy quote or some productivity thing, but not necessarily the thing to help you find stuff. So we put that on there. Retention was extremely high. We got in a bunch of conversations. There was two notable ones. I think the first one really hit us pretty hard, where there was about a 60-person company, venture-backed, probably Series B at that point, maybe Series A or B. And they were going out to raise money. We didn't know that when we sort of went to do an on-site sort of visit with the founder. We just wanted to see how he was using the tool. And what was going on, and wanted to watch him use the tool, general like sort of user research, a little bit of customer development, but basically some kind of customer session. And so he was using the product and we were watching him use it. And then he's like, "What did you guys do?" And we're like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, how do these people have access to my documents?" The answer is yes, they have access, but no, we didn't do anything, because at the time we were building a pure read-only product. And so as a read-only product, we couldn't change the permissions that he was accusing us of changing, right? So what it turns out is that there were people who had access to a bunch of his old documents. And now that he was going out for a fundraise, he wanted to lock all of that information down and didn't realize who had access to what. So what he told us he did, it was like a Friday afternoon. He said after work, he went home, got on the computer, and started basically finding documents in our tool, finding people in our tool, and essentially going one by one, because we were a read-only tool at the time, one by one, and remove the people he didn't want on these documents manually. And he said he was up to like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. doing that. And this is what he told us after. So first of all, when we were in the meeting, my co-founder and I both were there, and we were having some interesting moments just listening to him and seeing what he was trying to do. Because what was supposed to be a product that was meant to help you find stuff ended up being a product to help you secure your stuff. And so that was one big data point. Another data point was someone had reached out to me and said, "Hey, come speak to the Boston Consulting Group digital ventures arm down in LA," and was supposed to speak on retention. And so the barter I had with the person was, "Hey, I'll come speak. That's totally cool. And do a little event around retention and talk about retention. But I need one thing from you," because this was Boston Consulting Group, right? "I need you to let me talk to your IT and security people, whoever's local there, for a couple hours. Is that okay? Can we fit that in too?" And he said, "Yeah." So then I went there and I wanted to talk to them about enterprise search and how do big companies think about it? How do they deploy it? What's the deal? We had already learned a bunch of things, so we had some hypotheses. So we had that experience with a smaller startup and what we saw there. So I start demoing the enterprise search product. They think it's pretty slick because of the way we did the UI, how quick it was, this, that, and the other. And then the guy looks at me, he's like, "Can I show you something?" I'm like, "Okay." So then he goes over to his computer, because we were on my computer, turns around. We all look over there. There's a couple of us, two of the IT folks and me. And he's like, "Check this out." And then he shows me Box.com's admin interface. And I won't share the words he used, but they weren't very flattering. I still hear the same about some of these tools, but that's a different story. And basically he's like, can you do what you did over there for us over here? And so that was like the second big data point. And then I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, look, it has pagination. Look how slow it is. Look what it takes for me to change permissions in bulk. I cannot. And a bunch of other things about the interface. And so that those two data points were really strong for us to be like, hey, maybe there's something here where we should actually be thinking about similar technology that we have, but using it to help people secure their documents versus find documents.
So how important do you think it is that you actually met with customers really early on as a founder, and you didn't try to just keep building off of taste or outsource that to someone else in the company to do?
I think it's a little bit of a trick question because, if you outsource it, you're in any way, you're essentially equivalent of asking for luck to happen. So things just to show up for you. So I'm not saying it doesn't work. Sure, if you have a bunch of trusted people, you've worked with these people before, they're going to go out and do that and bring that back to you. Maybe it can work. But in my experience, I believe that if you're starting a company, you're a founder, then everything's your job. And one of the most important things is talking to customers, which should never not be your job. And I'm one to see like someone on LinkedIn post about a CEO either got the job or has been quiet for a while and is like, I'm going on a tour of our customers. I talked to this many customers. Well, I'm like, well, why do you need to do that at your scale? Don't you have people to do that? And usually what happens is people do that when they feel like the company has lost sight of the customer. And that's usually a CEO or founder going and doing it much later. So that's just evidence of like, yeah, when you lose sight of it, you go do that. So why not just figure out how never to lose sight of it, which means you're doing that all the time, basically, if you're a founder, regardless of the scale of your company. I know there's a lot of things out there about founders who have done this early, later, et cetera. But like right now, if I complain about Stripe or complain about Shopify or complain about Figma, somebody on those teams is helping me out one way or another. And it doesn't matter what size of account you have. If you're making a reasonable sort of post about these products and your usage of them and any issues you have, these people kind of come to the rescue, so to speak, of the product. And a lot of times it is the founders, regardless of their scale and size. Even like Steve Jobs emailing back to a customer, things like that are all the famous stuff we hear. There's a reason that's stuff we keep hearing. It's because it's the way to do things.
Why do you think a lot of maybe newer founders or aspiring founders keep just building more features when maybe they're not getting the signal they want instead of talking to customers?
I think you can imagine that a founder is really good at building and they might think they're good at ideas, but a lot of the time those ideas aren't ideas that a actual other person besides them or their team cares about. And so they get in this cycle of sort of ignoring the truth. And the truth is they just didn't get any signal, and building more stuff won't help them get signal unless they're getting that stuff out to enough people or the right people or even a small group of people before pushing it out further. So I think the why behind it is just people do what's comfortable. And a lot of times the builders do what's comfortable for them, which is they like to build, which makes sense.
Yeah, I think with startups and starting a business, you need to be brave and you need to maybe face the uncomfortable truth sometimes. And that can only be done if you actually speak with people. So I think people avoid it in order to delay that uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, I've seen that. Also, to be honest, like I've never seen someone not kick out of it once they realize the mistake they make. So usually I'm just spending time trying to help them make the mistake. Make the mistake if they're going to make the mistake, and then correct them later, or help them see kind of how not to make the mistake. For example, people are like, hey, I get these DMs every now and then. Hey, here's my product. What do you think? My first response is, what do people that are going to use it think? And so I tend to have a bunch of these lines that I just reply back when I see that someone might not be actually thinking about the user or the customer. Why do they want my opinion? They should take the opinion of someone who is actually going to use their product or is in their target audience. And then if they tell me I'm in their target audience, I'll tell them I'm a terrible person to put in your target audience because I'll either not care about your product or I'll beat it up. I'm nowhere in the middle, right? Because I build these things, right? And I have a high standard for the products we ship, and I never think they're awesome. So I'm not going to think your product's awesome either, especially as a user. So don't let me try your product. Don't have me ask me about your product. You could ask me how to figure out whether your product works or makes sense or whether people love it, but you shouldn't be asking me about it.
Okay. So you made a pivot then from FYI into Nira, moving more into security. How and when did you know that you had product market fit?
I think for us at Nira, we knew we had product market fit pretty early on because of those two instances that I mentioned. And I tend to not get into products and building them without understanding what the hair on fire problem is. So when it came to finding documents back then, before AI, the hair on fire problem was they're scattered across tools, and I'm a little embarrassed when I try to go find them during a meeting and no one can find them. And we heard a lot of things where it's like I'm in front of our CEO and I can't find that document. That was a very common thing that we heard. Or I'm in a meeting and I'm sitting there trying to find the document. Everyone's scrambling. We finally ping someone in Slack. They ping someone else. Then eventually find that document. No one can remember the title. No one can remember even what's in it. So searches, things like that don't work. So we just found the behavior to be a lot more human, for lack of a better word, than the way that we mechanically think of, hey, here's the search box, go find the stuff. So the reason I share all that is like, I think at that time I did 52 customer interviews and analyzed that information, even to find the opportunity of enterprise search and finding documents. Even though it felt obvious, it didn't feel obvious in terms of what the solution should be. So the reason you could click on a person and see everything shared with them is because one of the common behaviors that we learned was that people are asking people they know, or people have a memory of who might own the document, or at least who shared the document with them. And so those kind of things helped us sort of find the things that were really sort of, some would call these paper cuts, where they're kind of minor. But the thing is, those specific paper cuts around enterprise search, one, they could be solved with a single product. At least we believe that. We did solve it. And two, they add up to be quite painful when you start adding in the 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes here and there. And so it ended up being something worthy of pursuing at the time. And then so through that, as you know, and what we talked about, we had discoveries of deploying that, getting it to a bunch of people, and then getting their feedback on it, and then realizing that there is actually much more interesting and bigger opportunity for us that looked more like a mid-market enterprise B2B sort of opportunity, not like a bottom-up. What we were trying to do with enterprise search was actually build a bottom-up motion, which still nobody has that I can see, but maybe Notion and other companies might try to figure that out. But there's so many things now that I don't think, the value prop of a lot of those products is very diluted.
So did the decision maker change? You said kind of it was bottoms up. Did it move then to the IT department because it was more of a security cell?
Yeah. So initially it was anyone that could pick up the tool, as long as they were allowed to. And then we started, and this is with the enterprise search. And then we started getting into committees, and those are like committees inside of companies that were in charge of building out their knowledge management sort of systems. And so we started talking to them. And then what we realized is committees aren't the best when it comes to selling to them. And so once we realized that, we already had a bunch of data points that we were like, okay, we're gonna have to find another way to do this enterprise search thing. We also started talking to folks who deployed SharePoint, and it's really not IT always. A lot of the time it's HR that's trying to deploy things like that sometimes, especially in the case of a tool like that. So because they need a wiki, they need everyone to understand these things, and they're not going to use Confluence necessarily like the engineers use. So we started talking to HR folks. We even became part of a group that helped startups reach HR folks, talk to them more, and realize they don't necessarily have the budget. So they might be involved, but they don't have the budget. So these kind of learnings helped us see that there's probably a different buyer. So if you take a traditional, pivot, so a pivot is different than a hop. Slack was a hop. They went from a game to a messaging tool. There wasn't any learnings from the game that I can think of that would justify calling it a pivot. What we did was we really pivoted. We had a product. That product was already usable for a certain piece of the puzzle, this other sort of customer profile that we decided to start focusing on, which was essentially first IT, because IT was the one that usually gets tasked with solving these problems. IT runs the internal help desk. A lot of the problems around documents and managing permissions actually comes through the internal help desk. We had customers that told us 20 to 30% of the queries from the help desk of employees filling stuff in have something to do with like Google Drive or Microsoft 365 or something like that.
So yeah, that makes sense. When I sold Synergize, which was a training product, it was directly to IT, and that sales motion was pretty easy because they manage training and support and the deployment. And then I worked on a digital citizenship for education product for a bit. and there was like 10 stakeholders. It was like IT, and then there was like curriculum, and then there was principals, and you could just never get anything done because there was just too many people who were involved, but they didn't necessarily handle budget or deployment.
Yeah, exactly. And that happens a lot in B2B. And so you're trying to find your way around those things and make sure that you understand champion, buyer, all those kinds of things, And traditionally, I wouldn't necessarily sell something without understanding that. I think that goes back to your point of if you just build it, then you don't really understand the nuances of all these different types of people that are either trying to buy, use, champion your product. And so then you don't understand what to do to appeal to them. So oftentimes, some of these folks will look at legacy products and be like, why do they have this feature? And if they're asking that question, they don't really necessarily understand who needs this feature, not why do they have this feature.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to move directions now. So I'm going to say and put a few quotes on the screen regarding AI. Tell me if it still rings true and is applicable today. All right, so the first one here is from 2018. It says, when someone asks me for advice, I usually ask a few questions first. I'm rarely given enough context upfront to give actionable advice that specific users for their situation. Often the questions I ask are in themselves the best advice I can give. So when I saw that, I thought of like, this is kind of something that people could now ask or prompt themselves. Like, I mean, what's your thought on that?
I don't think so. I think people still seek advice from other humans. I don't think this is stuff most people will prompt themselves without a lot of prodding. I think, you would think founders and folks like that do that, but like still the best advice I give is still not happening through ChatGPT. A lot of the time, like the contextualization of the question is what even the people who ask these questions in this way naturally will not contextualize it for ChatGPT. So you could say that, okay, you can replace it, but is it going to go ask you a bunch of questions back unless you know that you need to ask those questions or have it ask those questions back? So I think it gets pretty complicated. I'd say this is more true than ever because there's a lot more information and people think ChatGPT can give them the answer off the bat. I think it requires a lot more work for it to be able to do that.
All right, next one here. If you're building an AI product today, you're competing against ChatGPT. Not technically, but in people's heads. That means your product has to feel 10x better for the same use case. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is still true in my mind. Actually, I think it's more true than ever because the more ChatGPT grows, the more people use ChatGPT, the more people think they can do what they want to do with ChatGPT, whether ChatGPT can do it or not. I'll give you one really funny example that comes to mind that's sort of more recent. ChatGPT will tell you it will make slides for you, or it will tell you it will make a Notion doc. It does not do either of those things today, but it will tell you consistently all the time. If you use it for, or try to use it for content and things like that, it will tell you it can do that, but it cannot. So I think, I know that's a weird like tangent to this, but like, yeah, if you're not 10x better than ChatGPT for your use cases, I don't think you'll be able to exist at some point in time when ChatGPT is good enough or something similar like Claude or something gets to those use cases.
Yeah, I think unless you have some sort of unique distribution, like you're a celebrity or something, and you can sell a product based on your brand or name, that's a wrapper. I think otherwise it's going to be really difficult to make any headway unless it's really significantly better than what someone can do with ChatGPT, because they're not necessarily going to even go out and look for it either.
That's right.
All right, one more here. The way I work has completely changed. I'm thinking inside AI models more than I'm thinking alone. The speed, the iteration, the ability to push an idea further without waiting for a meeting, a reply, or a second opinion, it's unreal.
Yeah, I think I've written about this. I got on the How I AI podcast and talked about some of the things I do, but like most of the time, like if I'm hung up or stuck on something, pretty tactical, I can use ChatGPT to get me where I want to go by giving it enough context. So I've created a bunch of projects. I don't really use custom GPTs a lot, but I use projects quite a bit because it's just simpler. And I've written instructions for those projects and they allow me to do things repeatedly. I have a pretty massive product project that has a bunch of my favorite frameworks. And anytime I need to review something or need help writing or even thinking about product, I'll usually go to it and get a good starting point on top of whatever prompt I start with. So it doesn't replace the thinking. I think it's more like it really helps me think and come up with more ideas faster, but also more depth faster usually too.
Yeah, I also feel like something it helps is if you ever feel stuck, it can kind of just get the motion going by asking a few questions or throwing in some principles or a framework, and it can kind of just keep that momentum going so you don't kind of get stuck for a few hours. You kind of just
That's
ask
right.
enough good questions, get enough outputs, and then you kind of continue with that momentum.
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. So speaking of the How I AI, I'm going to throw that doc up, which you did a few months ago. And I'd love to understand, what would you say are your top 3 tips that founders can apply today to be more productive? Let me just throw that up here.
I think it's a really loaded question. I mean, I'm happy to give some tips, and oftentimes, like, it's really
It is
contextual.
a loaded question, but I'll
Yeah.
let, just whatever
Yeah. No,
comes to your
I'll
mind first.
answer
I
it.
know
I'm
you
just
can go
saying.
forever.
Yeah. I'll answer it. It's all good. I'm just saying it's pretty loaded. I think the biggest tip is anytime that you have context that you can provide to ChatGPT to personalize the thing you're asking about, your outputs are going to get 10 times better. So I've created projects where it's like, give it an understanding of my boss, give it an understanding of me, and then just talk through things to the point where my boss had created a manual for himself. Some people do a user manual for themselves as a manager, things like that. And so he had created one, and I basically used it and put it in ChatGPT, told it what my Enneagram is and what his Enneagram is, the personality test. And then I consistently used it to get feedback as if I was him.
You're a peacemaker, right?
Yeah. So Enneagram type 9. And so I would go in there and I would basically, maybe have something I wanted to message him or write something up. And if it was something where I was like, oh, I'm not sure how it's going to land or how should I structure this a little bit better, I'll put it in there and it'll give me some really good advice on how to frame it to him, considering my personality and his manual. And he had sent some other articles too that he really liked. And he was, I was a product manager and he was our head of product growth. And so I would use that information too to help kind of figure out, okay, what would his feedback be, or how can I rejigger this? So that was a really massive big one. And what the thing related to that, this would be number 2, which is I think folks aren't doing meta prompting. I know it's right there and I have like a operating manual on it a little bit, but that one really just you can create a project and let it help you prompt. But like, for example, if I'm going to do deep research, I'll have AI make the prompt for me first and I'll give it context. I just did that right before this call on some deep research run I wanted to do. And I was like, hey, make me a comprehensive deep research prompt about X. And then I would give as much detail as I can about X. And then it'll spit me out a prompt. And then I actually tend to use it in multiple tools just to correlate the data, use Claude, Perplexity, and ChatGPT, and run that prompt for deep research. And then now I have more deep research to do whatever I want with. So I found that to be super valuable too, meta prompting. So the first one's really context. Think about context in the places where at work, context would help you get feedback or help you think. Number 2 is this idea of meta prompting, where like if you're going to prompt and it's a deep research prompt or even something more advanced you want to do, meta prompting is a pretty cool way to get better outputs, because you're basically making the AI tell you how to use the AI for what you're trying to get done. So I think that's why that works really well. And then I think the third thing, again, these are all related to some extent, but it is the one I talk about, the sales system end to end. I think the big thing there is, and I mentioned this earlier, but if there's a framework I like and I can find materials on it, I will dump that into a ChatGPT project and then start using it for what I need. So, for example, I'll give one example: the sales system. I was on a call. It was a recorded call. It was a sales call just yesterday, and I essentially took the call, took the materials from my my favorite sales framework, Winning by Design, and actually had it reverse engineer the call into the framework. And then now I have this document where it's got all the answers and questions as if we had already thought through the framework prior to the call, and kind of it spit out like the fill in the blanks. But I knew what to ask on the calls, obviously, and there is questions and agenda I could have done. In this case, I didn't, because I kind of knew what I was going to ask and didn't really worry
Yeah.
about a lot of that, and instead reverse engineered it and kind of filled in the blanks after the fact.
So you gave the prompt the meeting transcript, or what information?
Yeah, I
did you
gave it
give
the transcript and I told it to reverse engineer a part of the framework I wanted it to fill out.
And why do you use projects? And you said you don't use custom GPT. So
I just got used to using projects. I mean, all I'm trying to do is shove context in there, and custom GPTs were a little more advanced and, to be honest, a little more flaky than projects. It's just
yeah,
when I
fair enough.
tried them, and then I
Yeah,
was just like, oh, this is cool. It works.
I use custom GPT sometimes, but I don't like that it's not organized. Like they don't stay together. They just kind of go in the main feed and then I lose it. And the advantage of projects is everything's like nicely put together.
Yeah, and yeah, I have concepts of how I use projects, and a lot of it's like it has the context. So, I would rather use something simpler, and I can give it instructions. You could do that with custom GPTs, but even the framework of how you do it with actions and a bunch of other stuff is, for lack of a better word, a lot more technical. So it feels a lot easier to just use projects. Also, like I like to show other people how to do this stuff too.
Yeah.
And projects is easier to show people how to do it.
Yeah, that's fair. Even just mentally thinking about, oh, this is just like a folder, it's a project, rather than like I'm building a GPT, it feels like there's technical overhead, even if there's not huge technical overhead.
right.
Just, yeah, that makes sense. And then I heard you say something about like you really started liking to use the tools once memory kind of came on board, but you do like a regular cleanup of the memory. Just curious if you can elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, I'll just look at the memory like once a week that I have the memories. I mean, I've also hit the point where memories gets close to capacity. So it forced me to start looking at it. But you look at it, and some of this stuff in the memories is just things it decided to put in there, right? Most of the stuff.
Yeah.
So pruning it is a smart thing if those things are irrelevant or not that important for your memories in ChatGPT. It's that simple. If you haven't and you have memories on, you should go look at it because there's probably a bunch of stuff in there you don't care for.
Yeah, you might have even been talking about some random project or something, and now it's using that memory for everything you're working on, even though it's not related to what you're working on. I've seen that before where I'm like, how come it keeps talking about this? And then I go check the memory and I'm like, oh, that one random conversation I had, it seems like it's indexed those memories.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of times I'll use incognito if I don't care to save it. Yeah, that way it doesn't get into memory.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. So now I want to move in a little bit of a different direction. You've called Kissmetrics your billion-dollar mistake. Competitors like Mixpanel leverage freemium to outlearn and outacquire you. If I dropped you back in 2011, but with today's judgment, what are the first few things that you would do to kind of maintain that lead, and why?
I think in that business, one of the things that we really sort of had a big miss on is not being probably as aggressive as we could have been with customer acquisition. And in particular, I probably would have, in hindsight, just doubled down on sales and tripled down on sales so that we could get that signal much faster. There's also things like today, things like what Superhuman did with concierge onboarding, where they would onboard every user regardless of the price point. I think those are sort of the tactics that we had done, but we hadn't really doubled down on in the way that I would today.
Is there anything that you would do outside of the sales and the GTM differently?
No, I think those are the two big lessons from that one. We had everything else going for us.
Okay. And would you have kept freemium going, or would you have gone in that direction, or is it more?
We never had freemium there on the core product at Kissmetrics. I think the answer is yeah. We underappreciated the fact that Google Analytics was free and that folks like Mixpanel were providing a lot for free. We just had traction outside of that and enough leads, so we never really thought of the longer term or midterm implications of that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense, because when you have traction and things are going well, you don't want to almost make it seem like the value of the product less by having a freemium, or just deal with the additional cost of it as well.
Yeah, we had some considerations on costs on our end that we probably should have ignored, but that had to do with outside factors in the business more so than inside factors. So, but even then, it still would have been possible. We just didn't really appreciate what that does for your brand when you have a free plan.
Okay. So it sounds like it's actually not a ton of changes you would do. You would have just been more aggressive on hiring sales and onboarding customers aggressively, and kind of changing the business model to acquire more users quickly. Like that was kind of the miss, was the pace of acquiring users.
Yeah, but in that case, we had product market fit. So that's the reason we should have done that.
Okay. And I guess that you just mentioned you had product market fit. So I guess that is one of those things where it's like when you have product market fit, you should be trying to aggressively get as many users as you can on the product because you know you have a system that works.
Yeah, you only have one job at that point, which is get the product in as many hands as possible, as fast as possible. You don't really have another job once you have product market fit. It's actually a harder job than getting to product market fit.
You think so?
Oh, yeah, by far. Think about how many companies have it and lose it.
Do you think that they lose it because they don't expand aggressively enough as fast as they can, or that the product requirements change over time to solve the solution?
I think there's a flywheel you have when you have product market fit that's essentially a user or customer flywheel where you see a velocity of feedback. That feedback, if used correctly, helps you keep product market fit. That's why it's a harder job, because the job of getting to product market fit, again, I'm not saying that's like not hard, but that is already something that if you don't get there, you don't get to take that next step. But that next step is very challenging. I mean, this is where innovator's dilemma comes in at small scale, large scale. All kinds of things start happening once you have fit. The irony there is the more users you get, you're essentially fighting fit with every user that comes on because they might be different than the early users. I mean, there's all these things that start happening at that point. And then that's not even to mention that once you have fit and you start getting a lot of users, everyone else starts coming after you because they could see that, because the users are talking about it to them. Right? Back to the initial point, which is like, you don't have fit unless they're talking about it. Well, they're not talking about it. Then do you have fit? The answer is no, because they're not talking about it. If it's not a 10x better experience, it's not something where they're like, holy crap, this is so amazing compared to the alternatives. I don't want to use anything else ever again. Right? But the second someone says that to a competitor, the competitor's like, oh crap, what are we doing wrong? And then they go dissect all your stuff, and then your product market fit erodes for that reason too. So I'd say product market fit erosion for a company exists. I know other folks are saying, oh, there's all this other issues going on with the product market fit right now. I don't think there are any issues with product market fit. I think the bottom line is it's a tough thing to get to and even tougher to keep.
I do feel like as a founder, once you have it, it is hard to really do what you're saying, which is like go all in and expand really fast and really push 100% for that flywheel. Because that's probably not how you got to product market fit, right? Like when you're going to product market fit, you're kind of moving slowly and methodically and testing things and, trying to be cost conscious and all of those things. So you don't run through your money and you have burn rate. But then there has to be that transition time when you kind of, put the foot on the pedal and go for it. And I feel like that's actually challenging to do.
Yeah. I mean, regardless of, your opinion on what someone has to do to get there. I mean, not everyone's slow and has the methodology to get there either, and not everyone has the cost constraints, right? Because you could be at a large company trying to get product market fit too. I think the issue is, to your point, like what got you there is not likely to get you to the next spot or the next milestone once you have product market fit. And the discipline is different for sure. There's a much more optimization mindset you need versus a discovery and creation mindset.
Do you think you're better at one of those two?
I think that the tech world likes to bucket people and things, and any human that thinks they're better at one or the other is probably probably doesn't appreciate the nuances of themselves. Is what I would say. I think it's a false dichotomy or whatever that we create in this world because we need to bucket things.
For sure. All right. Fact or fiction? You convinced Neil Patel to be your first co-founder by bribing him with Taco Bell.
More or less. I mean, I don't think it was explicit, but yeah, he used to love Taco Bell. He doesn't love it anymore. My son inherited that love, actually. And yeah, I've known him since he was 11. He's my brother-in-law, and definitely brought my fair share of Taco Bell to him once I knew he liked it. But that had nothing to do with our businesses. It just had to do with me dating his sister.
Yeah, that's funny. All right. I got a couple of quick questions here. First one, what is something most founders over-optimize, but there's a framework or a quick fix they could do instead?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I would say that founders probably over-optimize their own unique approach to hiring executives when there's a framework called the WHO method. That makes it very paint by numbers and increases your chances of hiring great executives. I just hear a lot of founders be like, oh, I only hire executives after I've talked to like 25 people that they work with, or whatever crap that you hear, right? And people make this stuff up, but there's an entire book called Who, and it's called Who Method, and it tells you exactly how to recruit and hire executives. It is a very deep process and time consuming, but it definitely doesn't have this bullshit like I need to talk to 25 people, or I need to ask these specific questions to each of those 25 people to understand if this person's any good for my company. So yeah, I think that's one I would call out.
And is that something where you would put the framework in GPT and put someone's credentials and
yeah, you could do a bunch of stuff like that for sure. It's that good of a framework. Yeah, for sure.
Next one, give me a hot take or unpopular opinion you have and why.
What you see on Twitter is about 6 months behind when it comes to building with AI. So any of the product development stuff I see that gets pretty popular, vast majority of it 6 months old. And I'm constantly trying to figure out, is that person just slow or did they know that? Usually the answer is they don't know that, they're just slow. So like, yeah, if you read something that folks are saying, whether it's Satya's prompts that he's using with Copilot or Aaron Levy's constant product development advice, it's usually 6 months old. So take that with whatever you want. But like, I see the post and I'm like, oh yeah, we figured that out 6 months ago. See another post. Oh yeah, that sounds about, it's kind of old now. Like already moved on to the next thing. And this is just because I built multiple products at once. And all of them were using AI in one way or another.
Why do you think that is? Because there's obviously people who are on the bleeding edge and they're posting as well. Is it more that they're waiting for confirmation that something's kind of gone mainstream before they want to post about it? Or
I don't think so.
No?
I just think that the pace of this stuff is too complicated. And if you're really not on the ground with your hands dirty, Satya's not. I don't think Aaron is, right? Fair enough. Then it's back to our original point. You're getting the information by proxy. Like with Satya, are those prompts he shared, being a thread boy, he shared a set of prompts. Are those actually his? Does he actually use them?
Or did 15 people on the team build like an engaging thread?
Yeah, I don't know, right? And I don't even question it. Even what Aaron says, I think it's great that he's sharing all this stuff. But like when you're on the ground in the dirt, you almost don't have time to talk about that. I don't have time to talk about that. I don't have time to talk about how to make agents work. I have time to talk about other things, but I'm going to go make agents work. I don't even call them agents. So that's a longer story, but like I think we're confused. I think that word has totally screwed us up.
Okay, so I guess piggybacking on that, who's your Mount Rushmore, your 4 favorite founders on X?
I don't really have favorites. I think I tend to look at the content, not the people. I look at the content, not the people. Like that's more interesting to me. And a lot of times it's like a book. So a book is only relevant to you. Obviously entertainment, fiction, different story, but a non-fiction book is only relevant to you if you can apply what you learn from it. Sure. Same with self-help and all these things. So if I look at a post and I think about the person, then I'm off in some la land of the value of it to me, because I don't want to rely on the fact that that person posted it for it to be valuable to me. I'd rather focus on the content. The person, then you might be biasing with like some social proof as opposed to the actual content of the post. And I'll give you an example, like memories in ChatGPT, a product I worked on. We had memories before ChatGPT did. Okay. But that was only because logically, if people are using this chatbot thing, how do you make sure it's contextualized as they use the product? Yeah, exactly. Like, come on. Like that's you're going to hit those problems, right? If and some people call it first principles, others call it something else. I don't know. I'm just trying to build something against, making it really useful for somebody. And I don't really care about much else. So, talking about this stuff, I think is exciting and maybe, generates some hype or makes people think something. But at the end of the day, like I'd rather build a product that works extremely well than talk about it. Yeah, I think that's useful. I think a lot of people do get caught up on like what information they're taking in and how much information they're taking in. And they're not actually like using that information. And I think it's more important to be aware of, are you able to use that information and not just theorize about it, but actually like put it in practice right away. Yeah. And with AI, I think a lot of that stuff's really complicated because one thing can work, another thing can go off the rails on the metric. So for example, we can make a lot of AI work if we're willing to throw money at it. Yeah. Right. Better models, more context, all kinds of things that get way more advanced than that. But if you're willing to throw money at it, you can make it work. And I think we're in a world today where the folks that can throw a lot of money at it in the billions are throwing money at it, but we don't know what's going to work on the other end of it yet. And this is not more of caution. It's just more like the promise is incredible. I get that. But the promise won't get us to the future.
Yeah, 100 billion just kind of is, I think we're all like numb to that number now. It doesn't even seem like a lot.
It's kind of crazy.
Oh, it's 100 billion here. Oh, it's another news. Okay, and like 2 hours later, it's in the ether, and I forgot about it. And it's like, it's a big number. I should be focused on that, and or it should stick, but it doesn't stick anymore.
That's right. They're throwing it around. What are you going to do?
All right. Next one here. Delete one of these: Gemini, Claude, Grok, or ChatGPT.
Claude.
Why?
I think the number one thing they're good at is the code stuff, and that's getting everyone else catching up to it pretty fast now. Yeah, I used to be really into Claude early on when it was better than ChatGPT, at least in my opinion. And then they changed up their model with the 4. I think 3.5 was where I stopped using it after 3.5. But once 4 hit, I felt like they were optimizing for the coders, even in their new models. And that's just how I felt. And I haven't gone back, and I have no regrets on that. But I would have said Claude as number one, and not one I would remove off the list, and probably would have been Grok or Gemini. Grok has been pretty useful. I feel like they're giving us a lot of inference with Grok, and we can use it anytime. Really powerful model, actually. I think it's underappreciated.
Thank you so much for your time today. Where can everyone find you?
Twitter, HNSHAH on Twitter. From there, you can probably find my YouTube and a bunch of stuff. But Twitter, I tweet a lot. So.